Is the débat? The honourable for Calgary Centre.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. It's my privilege, my honour to rise today to speak on this bill, free trade between Canada and Ukraine. This is something that I know I represent the riding of Calgary Centre, but a lot of people know that I grew up in the small towns outside Edmonton, Alberta. And when you grow up in and around the breadbasket of Canada, like Edmonton, like Saskatchewan, like so many parts of the prairies, you actually do get intertwined with the Ukrainian communities. So many of the friends on the hockey teams when I was young, Harvey Cherwinski, the people, the Boychucks, all the families that we were intertwined with. This is the result of the wave of Ukrainian immigration that came into Canada after the Holodomor, which is a horrific episode in history, a genocide, if you will, of the Ukrainian people. And we built lives together with the Ukrainian immigrants that came at that point in time. It's a wonderful, wonderful blending of cultures, and we know these people and we love these people. And these people we will continue to support in any way we can going forward here. I'm also a conservative, everybody knows that. And one of the bedrocks of what I believe is the openness of free trade around the world, free and fair trade. Conservatives started free trade in Canada back in the Mulroney years. In the 1988 election, we fought for free trade with the United States. And other parties opposed that at that point in time, but it carried. And the parties that opposed it now are jumping on board saying, what a great thing free trade is now. But I remember pushing Canadians over the line because of the negative talk from the opposition parties, both the NDP at that point in time and the Liberals, who were staking our country's future on not having free trade. And I'm glad that they've come on board so much and they've helped expand free trade in 2 other countries, including Ukraine. Ukraine free trade agreement occurred. It was implemented actually by the last Conservative government, again, expanding that free trade across the country that we require, across the world, so that we can continue to advance economic progress and our values of freedom, our values of democracy. Think about how that took root in Ukraine. We supported Ukraine. We recognized Ukraine as a country. The Conservative government at the time was one of the first to recognize Ukraine as a country. Again, that bedrock of our blending with the Ukrainian people because of our common threads that bind us. This is something that we continue to build upon today. This is a great debate. I'm glad we're actually having this debate on this free trade agreement. And we can talk about the importance to the Ukraine, the importance to Canada, because this is an important free trade agreement, as was the one that was just recently negotiated and came into effect in 2017. So less than 6 years ago, we started having open free trade with Ukraine. And what happened since then, of course, is just over around 2 years ago, of course, close to 2 years ago, Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. So recognize what his goal was at that point in time. His goal was to submerge the Ukrainian people. He doesn't believe they actually are a separate people, a separate country, a separate entity where the people get to decide in a democracy how they rule themselves. Now, we stand for that. We stand for that here in Canada. We stand for that around the world. Democracy is something we need to uphold, and we will uphold it anywhere we can. And my party, and I hope all parties in this House, agree on that this is a bedrock of democracy. We continue to support democracies around the world. We continue to strongly support the people of Ukraine in their struggle against an oppressor that is on their border and inside their border actually killing people on a daily basis. These people are putting their lives on the line to maintain what we have built together, and we support them every step of the way, every day. I remember when the invasion first happened, I asked the Minister of Natural Resources a question. I said, would you please stop the oil trade between Canada and Russia? Because it was a transfer of about $5 million per day from Canada to import Russian oil. And at that point in time, the minister stood up and he says, we don't import any crude from Russia. Well, the minister didn't understand at that point in time the difference between crude and oil. So we did import about $5 million per day of partially refined oil from Russia to Canada in order to supply our needs on the eastern coast. We are actually a country that imports energy in the east and exports it in the western part of the country. This is a bit of a travesty because we were funding $5 million per day to Russia's war machine so they could take away the sovereignty of a democratic country. And this is something that was really an issue we had to get ahead of very quickly. And eventually the minister, in about a week, he figured out Greg is right. In fact, we do have trade with Russia on oil, and we do need to do something about it. And then, of course, within the next month, they looked around and figured it out. So, incompetence. I accept that not everybody's going to be on top of every file. When it's brought to the attention of the government very quickly about what to do about trade with Russia while they're subsuming or attempting to subsume one of the best and emergent democracies in Europe, we need to act quickly. And I deplore that this government didn't act as quickly as it should have. I implore them to act more quickly in getting Ukraine its needs as soon as possible, particularly in this existential fight they have with an authoritarian regime right on their borders. But we gave support. Think about Conservatives where we are in this. Conservatives supported free trade everywhere in the world. Everywhere free and fair trade. We've negotiated great agreements all along the way. We've got one here we have to look at. And of course, as everything, devil's in the details as we go through it. And we're looking forward to looking into the details of this and getting the input from so many people at committee when we bring this before the International Trade and examine the committee there. But think about the other support we've given Ukraine. Madam Speaker, we've actually helped them build their military under the Harper government. We brought a whole bunch of expertise over where effectively their ability to defend themselves at this point in time is largely dependent upon the fact that Canada stepped up at a time when danger wasn't on the horizon, but Ukraine needed our help to build the infrastructure, build that security that has sustained them at this point in time and ensured that they don't just become subsumed by a much larger entity, Russia, Vladimir Putin's Russia, just like they have been historically. It's called the Bloodlands for a reason, Madam Speaker. A lot of conflict has happened here over the centuries. But I'll go on here. We talk about all the things we could be doing with Ukraine at this point in time if this government would actually look at what trade means to this country. We don't have liquefied natural gas going to Europe. Why not? Because we've had our head in the sand about the #1 way we can contribute to fixing global warming around the world, and that is to get so many countries off of coal. Who has stepped up in that case? Vladimir Putin's Russia. They export natural gas everywhere they can. They had pipelines into Europe. They have pipelines through Ukraine going to Europe. They actually have pipelines of natural gas supplying people that they're fighting against at this point in time. We stand against this. We think that there should be the availability of resources from a democracy like Canada to be able to supply Europe with the energy needs they require at this point in time. I want everybody to know that when conflict happens, like a war in Europe, Russia, Ukraine, resources are everything. If you don't have the resources to fund your democracy, you have to capitulate eventually. So we need to continue to supply those resources and think about what we can do here. Think about how we can displace the Russian oppressors here. We can actually replace their natural gas with Canadian liquefied natural gas. We can replace the fertilizer. They're the #1 and 2 exporters of fertilizer around the world. Canada actually is the swing producer, and we could actually get a whole bunch of fertilizer, potash, offshore to actually displace Belarus and Russia, who are funding a war machine that is challenging the existence of Ukraine at this point in time. That would be important trade mechanisms to take here. International commerce has to proceed. But I remember very well. I remember the Kiewitz program. You think about how we actually, at the beginning of the war, we developed this government, a Kiewitz program, and that's the program, Canada-Ukraine immigration program, where we allow them to come in here to Canada and potentially to move back. So it's a temporary, for the time being, program for Ukrainians to come and be safe here in this country. So many of those came through Calgary Centre. My office helped so many of those people. I'm proud. I meet with those people often, and it was another great testament to how our two countries work together hand in hand in advancing common goals, common objectives, common culture, if you will, Madam Speaker. Let's see how this free trade agreement melds into that, I'm happy to take some questions at this point in time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.